I've had 3 people ask me to run for mayor. I'm sitting there going, why?
There you go.
We just don't want the last one to get.
We're all,
Are we?
yeah,
Are we?
City Hall is what you are.
Oh, boy.
No, you're not muted.
Okay.
Sir?
Text me. Things go sideways.
Thank you, Matt.
So we're on a hot mic. We can't say nothing. Can't get into discussion.
We can see you, Mike and Alex. It's kind of cool. Looking good.
Groups that are just attending.
Oh, I don't know if I'm looking good.
You're. Oh, this one. So this list is about actually being part of the task force. I'll have you come and sit if you're comfortable with it down on this side.
I've had my measles shot and my smallpox shot. So. Worry about-
Well, that happened a long time ago.
Hey, so I got a question on this. I know I'm live here. Can anybody come behind us here and sit away from the table like most task force? Okay.
And it's, I think we're actually, it's being pushed out live broadcast, so maybe up on the website.
Yeah.
But it's open to public, and anybody can click on the Zoom link online. In fact, that's what I'm gonna do with that other machine.
Hey, Matthew,
Yeah.
the owl really zooms right into people's faces, so make sure the cards are sort of close to, closer to the edge there. And actually the glare, it is a little bit hard to see, see the names. You need a, you need darker font and more bolded font for being able to see the names. So when you guys speak, we can just have you guys say your names since we won't be able to see your cards very well.
So anybody like the weatherman now? It's been nuts.
Yeah. So run back upstairs really quick to grab something.
Yeah, there was a lot of ice in them,
Yes, there was.
wasn't it? I wasn't too worried about my driving, but it's the guy behind you,
There you go.
the guy sliding next to you.
You gotta keep those body shops employed. So, yeah, support the economy, what's left of it. So have you ramped up umpiring? You're not doing that anymore?
No, I retired
You already did.
from football and softball
Oh, wow. Okay.
because who wants me to ref their games?
Yeah.
If you're 11 coach, would you want me refing your games? One coach
Oh,
actually,
yeah, I get what you're saying. Oh, yeah, okay, okay.
11 coach goes, so you can't do my game. Like, what are you talking about? It's just, you piss off your voters.
Odd.
They're giving me a hard time, but
Yeah.
Are you umpiring?
Pardon?
Are you umpiring?
No,
well, I did it for
No.
25 years for football.
I coached for a long time and
Mhm.
now I just sit back and watch grandkids play.
Yeah, I'm going to West Omni's game Friday night.
Yeah.
West Omni plays South, and I usually go to that game all the time.
I don't know if you've been over the field, the varsity field over here at West.
Mhm.
God, it's as nice as any MLB.
Yeah, I was there last week for a couple weeks ago for a
Pretty
game.
nice, isn't it? Feels in great shape. Took a little bit of work, but
Matthew, go upstairs or something. Alex?
Yeah, so we go grab something.
Oh, okay. Oh. I didn't mean to like take.
No, it's, I just forgot.
Yeah, it looks like it's. Okay, cool.
This been recorded?
I think and hit record.
Okay.
We are being recorded right now.
You're not gonna have to run out, are you?
No, I'll be here, but we'll
My
be.
chiropractor had to in that, and I was the next guy in line. His wife's having a baby.
If the phone rings and you see me run out of the room,
Yeah,
it's because I'm having a baby. Well, not me, but
You got a baby coming? I forgot about that.
dude, June 1 is the due date, but we have had babies earlier than that. So my son was 8 weeks early. Or not to have a repeat of that, but
will we ever get on this committee to where we're mandatory everybody here?
I'd like that.
Because it's more reactionary when you see people's faces and stuff and you can sense if they're serious about what they're doing or if it's just coming here for a retirement gig, just to
Right.
participate or something.
Yeah, be involved.
Yeah. And,
Or have her name on the plate or a spot.
yeah. So do you have a third? Is there a third in the family?
My grandson is third.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah, so my son, we skip every year, every generation skips. So Alexander and then skip, my son's John Cameron Alexander, my grandson's
That's who
Alexander.
your grandfather was. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
My-
cool.
So Alexander's gonna be in the family forever, so. My grandfather was, they got kind of screwed up because my dad named me after him. His father was Frederick Alexander. And his grandfather was Joseph Alexander, Alexander Joseph. And it's kind of weird, but it's been around forever. so. Well, my son is getting married to a lady named Alexis.
That's the one thing, all the daughter-in-laws in our family, not mine, but my brother's wives, they're all Lindas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have 3 of them in that, so.
So are we ready to go in?
Yeah, I guess so. We are missing quite a few task force members. We're missing Mr. Evans, Emma Dean, Donna Holt. Scott is not able to attend today, and then Will. So I just wait another minute or so. I could send them reminder emails, I guess.
Hey, Anne. Donna sent us an email saying that she wasn't going to be able to make it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't get that email. So then we're missing Emma, Will, and Jeffrey Evans.
Well, I think in the interest of everybody's kind of time is, unless there's a major objection to it, we'll go ahead and get started. And then they can kind of jump in as needed. I'll keep an eye out for them. First, just wanted to welcome everybody here, both online and in person, to our second task force meeting. Did want to touch on just a few things before we get started. One of those is, in the interest of time, we won't be doing any introductions. We've had our first meeting. If the first time you provide comment, you want to just announce your name, that's probably helpful, but we're not going to do kind of a round robin piece at the start of this. And the meeting is open for all interested parties to listen in. However, the active participation is limited to just task force members, the consulting team, and staff only. If there's non-task force members in attendance, which there isn't right now, but excuse me, or online and have comments, definitely encourage folks to either go to our website, come down to City Hall, give us a call. We'll get you on the interested parties list and open up a dialogue with you. We certainly want to hear from you. As most of you probably know, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the project website for interested parties who weren't able to attend live. The consultant team of APG MIG, specifically Matt Hasty and Kate Rogers, are here to help guide the task force through the material today, and keep the discussion moving forward in an efficient, productive fashion. So ask that you please kind of keep discussions and comments limited to the agenda items, particularly the strategies list we'll be looking at today. There was some additional information in the packet regarding accessibility requirements and some statistics that came. That's supplied based on some comments in the first task force meeting. We're not going to be covering those materials today, just providing the information that was asked for. The intent here is to identify just in general strategies the task force would like to consider. Feel that they have merit as a viable tool. It's really not a time for the sausage making and getting into the details of implementation or anything like that. We have a lot of ground to cover. So Matt Hasty, our consultant, he may at times pause the discussion and ask that we kind of move along. If we get hung up on one particular item, we can always, if we get through everything, we can always circle back to those at the end. And then would ask that, that as we go through this process, that there not be, that we encourage collaboration, but if want that collaboration to occur at the table, not via other forms of communication, text messages, things like that, internal to the task force, especially while we're meeting. And make sure I hit all of my little points. Since we are hybrid, Matt will be kind of, after I turn it over, we'll be running the meeting. He'll be looking for the hand raise function for people to have comments. For folks that are in the room here, if you just want to indicate to me, I'll actually raise my hand on this computer so that Matt knows we've got a comment here. That should keep things fairly smooth. The little units that you see on the table here are called meeting owls. That is the recording or the video and microphone. It also is the speaker. So when you're speaking, generally you want to speak towards the unit, just like it was a person almost. And that should keep things moving along pretty well. With that, if there's no questions, I'm not sure if Mary, you wanted to say a few words and then we'll turn it over to Matt to go.
So I would like to say thank you for everyone that has volunteered to be on the task force and also to participate in this process of looking at our entire apparatus of housing, affordable housing, single family, mixed density. I think Albany is in a unique position in that we're coming out of this COVID pandemic. We have a new community development director that is leading the department. And we're experiencing change, and change sometimes is not comfortable. But I think looking at the entire apparatus of housing, types of housing, is important for every community. We've all seen the numbers. Oregon's about 630,000 places to sleep short, and we need to work on those things within our communities before we get to the point where we have nowhere to put people. And I think it's important that the young couples have a chance to buy their first home, and seniors have a chance to move down to a smaller home so somebody can buy their bigger home and live comfortably in the city of Albany. So thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and please follow the guidelines Matt laid out, and also our consultants will guide us through this conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. So thank you very much.
With that, Matt, we will turn it over to you. And as I mentioned, or I think I've mentioned, staff will be here for questions really, but we're not going to be active participants in the discussion. It's really the task force. So with that, Matt, you can take it away.
All right, thank you. And thanks everybody for being here. So just a quick couple of words about kind of the rest of our time in the meeting. We're going to give you a kind of a brief overview of the results of the focus group meetings we had as part of this process. And actually Kate Rogers is going to do that in just a moment. And then we're going to spend the rest of the meeting, other than kind of quick next steps at the end, talking about the menu of housing strategies we sent out to y'all in advance of the meeting. And so I will sort of provide a little more guidance about how we would like to sort of facilitate that conversation after Kate talks about the focus group meeting summary. And I'll also give a very brief overview of those strategies we're going to assume you've had a chance to look over the material we sent, and we're not going to go through those in detail as consultants. But I'll say a few words about them, and then we really want to spend most of the meeting hearing from you all. So I will stop there. I'll turn it over to Kate, then she'll turn it back over to me in a moment or a few minutes.
All right, thanks, Matt. So you received a summary of the focus group meetings in your packet. Those took place about a month ago. Over the course of a week, we held 7 different meetings. Each of the meetings had between 5 and 8 participants, and each one had a pretty good mix of different types of stakeholder groups represented. And this is a list of, I think, most of the groups that participated. So, residents, housing developers and builders, affordable housing providers and service providers, lenders, representatives of financial institutions, realtors, brokers, members of the Latino community in Albany, property managers, people who've experienced homelessness or housing insecurity, and folks who represent homeless shelters and sort of advocate for more housing for those groups. And we kind of focused on similar questions that we've been talking to you all about. Where are the greatest gaps in the housing supply? Where is there the greatest need that's not being provided currently in Albany? And then what are the strategies to kind of address those? So in terms of most needed types of housing, we heard over and over that home ownership options in the sort of $200,000 to $300,000 price range, that's kind of where the greatest need is, and there's just no supply out there right now. We heard that both from the sort of lenders and also from folks who are kind of looking for those sort of first home ownership opportunities. Also affordable rental housing. So, housing that is subsidized to be affordable to folks with lower, in the lower income brackets. Housing options for seniors, smaller homes, 1,200 square feet or less, 1 or 2 bedrooms, single level homes, both for, for seniors, folks with, mobility challenges, middle housing types. So townhomes and, small plexes and cottage clusters. We heard that from several folks, and those potentially offer kind of also fit into the sort of smaller home or, first time home buyer opportunity category as well. Folks, identified, accessory dwelling units, also affordable housing with specifically for larger families, so not just 1 or 2 bedroom units, but also 3 and 4 bedroom units. A couple people mentioned vertical housing or sort of mixed use development where there may be commercial on the ground floor and residential above. And also housing that's close to transit and services and employees or employment was identified as being important. And then when we asked folks what they thought were the kind of greatest barriers to developing those types of housing that were most needed, the responses tended to kind of fall into a couple different categories. So cost barriers, there's a lot of challenges in terms of the cost of land and construction costs. Several folks mentioned various development fees, including system development charges or SDCs, as being a challenge or a barrier to housing. And folks mentioned that sort of smaller units don't tend to kind of pencil out financially. They're just less profitable than larger, higher end units. So those are the types of units that tend to get built. Folks also mentioned sort of the time it takes to go through the permitting process or just the development process being a challenge, and that also tends to kind of add cost to the process. A few people mentioned when you bring land into the city boundaries through annexation and rezoning, that kind of adds to the time and cost of the process. 1 or 2 folks also talked about parking requirements. Those, tend to make projects more expensive, and they may not, be in sync with what the market is demanding. And then also several people mentioned there's just not a lot of available vacant land to develop for housing. Folks mentioned that local residents are competing with folks from out of state or, investors or cash buyers, and they just can't, they can't kind of offer the same, they can't compete with those buyers. And then also this idea of NIMBYism, or this sort of not in my backyard attitude, where, you know, residents who already have a house in a neighborhood in Albany might be a little bit concerned about changes to their neighborhood, and maybe fear of different types of housing that they're not used to. So those are some of the barriers. And there were a lot of ideas for strategies that were thrown out in the meetings. I'm not going to go through this whole list. You can take a look. But you'll notice if you look through this list, a lot of these strategies, you know, are also captured in the long menu of housing strategies that you all looked at and that we're going to talk about today. So I think that the takeaway is really that these strategies do have support from the stakeholders that we talked to in the focus groups. And I think in particular, you know, things that tend to reduce costs, address some of those sort of process, regulatory, timeline barriers. We heard those a lot. And also, you know, programs, connecting services, connecting resources for folks who need those were discussed quite a bit. So that's the kind of brief summary. I think that's my piece, and I'll hand it back to Matt for talking about the menu of housing strategies.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And again, I am not going to go through that menu in any kind of detail. I'm just going to sort of note the sources of, you know, where those things came from, what kind of information is in the menu, and then these categories that each have, you know, multiple strategies underneath them. So I'll kind of start with that. We've split these up into a number of categories based on previous work we and others have done, and that the city's done. So there are strategies related to updates to your development code or regulations. There are some that are centered around the supply of land. Kate mentioned that earlier in terms of stakeholder comments. Some are related to kind of financial feasibility and or incentives that can improve financial feasibility of development. Funding sources, either local or state funding sources, and then programs and partnerships. I think, you know, one of the things we heard consistently during those stakeholder interviews is not something the city can do by itself. You know, it's really important to have partnerships with kind of a variety of different community organizations and groups to make these things happen. So those are the categories. Kind of the sources of information were previous work that the city's done, including its housing needs analysis, that we worked with y'all on a couple of years ago. Other community discussions around housing. The state of Oregon has put together, they call it a crowdsourced list of housing strategies. So we drew from that as well. And then in describing these, you know, we have a brief description. We talk about who would implement this. Is this something the city would lead or somebody else? What has the city already been doing towards this end? Was this something identified in the earlier work that the city did in its housing needs analysis? And who's generally what types of populations or households or people are being supported or served by a given strategy? So that's just kind of a quick overview of what's in that menu of strategies. And so what we want to spend the rest of our time doing is getting your feedback on these strategies. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go around both the table at City Hall and then the screen and ask each of you to respond to these three questions. So one, as you looked at this list, and we know it's a long list and a lot of information, what are maybe some of the things that stand out to you as most important, or maybe they'll have the most bang for the buck? What are the 3 to 5 priorities? What would your 3 to 5 priorities be from that longer list? 2, is there anything missing? You know, have you worked on things? Have you seen other communities work on things that you did not see in this list? Are we missing some things? And then 3, do you see anything in that list that from your perspective for the city of Albany just seems like a non-starter? You know, it's not going to address the problem in your opinion, or you see it just being too challenging to implement or not being particularly effective in meeting the types of needs that we've been talking about. So those are the 3 questions we want you to answer. Again, we're going to get everybody to weigh in on this, take turns doing that. And so I would say plan to, you know, talk for like 3 to 5 minutes, and we'll kind of go on to the next person. And then hopefully we'll have enough time then to do a more of a kind of informal response, reaction, discussion, where you do use the raise your hand function, or physically raise your hand if you're sitting at the table with Matthew and he can kind of help call on folks. And then I'll just keep an eye, Kate and I and Ann will keep an eye on who has something to say. So, but we'll start out kind of going again around the group and taking you in turn. And so probably what we'll do is maybe we'll start with the folks in the around the table, the actual table, and then we'll go to the folks on the screen, and I'll kind of say, okay, next 3 folks will be, for instance, Cameron, Sharon, or Rebecca, based on who I see on my screen. I'm just going to kind of, go around the screen. So that's what we're going to do for kind of the majority of the rest of the meeting. And Kate has her physical hand up to note something or ask me a question here.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that after this meeting, Anne or someone from the city will be sending out a follow-up kind of poll survey to ask kind of similar questions that we're asking in this meeting. So if you have additional thoughts or you kind of change your mind based on the conversation that we have today, you'll have the opportunity to provide that input later as well. So if you don't get everything out in this discussion, there'll be further opportunities shortly after this meeting.
All right. So does that all make sense? Any just questions about kind of the process for the discussion moving forward? I think, again, we want to hear from everybody, whatever you have to tell us, kind of initially, and then let's hear what people have to say kind of in reaction response after that. So. All right, so I'm going to have Matthew, I'm going to have you start us off and kind of go around the physical table. And then I'll kind of I'll take us around the screen.
Sure. So this was my second meeting in this room today. So I'm going to start with Mike and we'll go counterclockwise.
I'll go last.
Oh, you
I'm going last.
Huh?
Well, Mr. Heyman.
Okay, yes, sure. Stephen Hammond, a resident of the community and probably one of the least qualified to go first. But as I went through the housing strategies, I looked primarily at things that would affect workforce people, and as people who are working and having trouble with housing affordability, not necessarily affordable housing, although both are very critical and important. So as I looked at these, I think that item 1.7, building height and density, it seems like one of the things that is potentially possible is to improve the ability to go vertically rather than horizontally in some particular areas. So I noted 1.7 as it's page 3 of 16.
There it is.
I also kind of tried to avoid some of the things that are already being done by the city. But that looked like an option that is feasible. Another thing that caught my attention was 2.2, the surplus land or affordable needed housing. Again, it applies to workforce kind of people, and it seems like if there is surplus land that is potential for use, then it ought to be used. Then 3.1, pre-approved plan sets for middle house types. I remember went to grad school, we lived in Ohio where Huber homes were the big housing project that took place after the war. It's sort of like, Ford said you could have any color you wanted, except as long as it was black. Well, the Huber homes, you could have the garage on the right side or the garage on the left side, but everything else was just the same all the way through. And it was a a real answer to the post-World War housing shortage. And those communities developed as real middle class, working class kinds of communities. People made improvements, but essentially, when you drove into that community, you knew you were in a Huber home community. And then I guess the last one I would want to advocate for anyway is 5.6. 5.6. Preserving safe, affordable manufactured homes. I don't know if in some of the newspaper articles I've been reading over the last couple of months, there's a real challenge in that a lot of mobile home parks are being taken over by developers, and all of a sudden a new set of rules comes about, and people are forced to move, or they can't live in a single modular house anymore. It has to be a double, has to be built before certain or after a certain time. So trying to come to some way of protecting homeowners in manufactured home communities.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Matthew, who lost the coin toss on who gets to go next there?
I'll go. I think for me, it's cost to build and also affordability all across the spectrum. Looking at affordable housing, the housing affordability from seniors down to the first young person that has graduated or has a job that wants to get his first apartment. So I think zoning incentives are for affordable and workforce housing is important, because as a city, we're working on economic development to attract business to build, to come to Albany and build. So I think that's important. Facilitating middle housing is, I have a lot, so I'm just gonna give you three that work for me. Facilitate middle housing types. I think it's important that we don't have just big mansions, but we have some 2-bedroom, 3 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms. I know Mike and I were talking a while back about the number of 1-bedroom apartments or 1-bedroom dwellings that were short. There's a lot of people in economic situations where that's all they can afford. But I looked at online regularly. I look online, and I'm seeing 1 bedrooms going from $1,100 to $1,500 per month, and a young person dealing with college loan debt and car payments and insurance. It's just not tenable for them to be able to afford to live in any city, not just Albany, but any city. I think that's really important. And you all know that I'm a senior advocate. And so accessibility is a big thing for me. I can't remember which one that was. Oh, here it is right here, 1.16, incentivize and promote accessible design. I have several hundred clients in several different states that have mobility devices, wheelchairs, walkers, stairs are prohibitive. And in my neighborhood, there's several homes that are 2 levels, but there's no bedrooms downstairs. So we need to think about how we design buildings. And we also need to, the last thing for me would be, for this particular topic, would be the cost to build a smaller home. We need to incentivize builders and developers that they're the pencils to build a 100 or 1,000 square foot house and a 3,000 square foot house. And so tiering the SDCs where would make sense, that would encourage them to build in our community. I think that I think Matthew has done a great job. His staff has done a great job as far as the timing, but as far as being able to say, Mike, I need you to build 27 single level homes, 1,150 square feet. We have to make it pencil, because unlike most people don't realize, the baby houses come from developers. And so we need to be able to incentivize them to build, whether it be tax relief, whether it be SDC relief, or drawing out to SDCs. And so that's my top 3 right now.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'd just briefly note that sort of tying SDCs to dwelling size is in there under 3.6. So yeah, great. Thank you. All right. I think we got one more person around the actual table. Physical table.
Around the table. I wanted to kind of hear from that. Okay. So I'm kind of jump around here. The number 1 on your list is that I have deep-seated fears that this committee is going to try to go for the old cliche of, for lack of term, tax the rich and give it to the poor and stuff like that, which people buying a $200,000 to $300,000 house, if it is available and it can be done, the situation is that a sliding scale, I approve a sliding scale on the size of the house to bring affordability in it, but I don't want to see us create like a CET tax for somebody wanting to build a 3,200 square foot house because maybe life's treated them good and everything else and stuff, you know. So it's all with people that are, if they have ambition to do that, that's one thing. I don't think we should be taxing them. On the number 2 list thing here, I just want to see if you really want to see things happen a little bit more better here, you have to be able to get City Hall here, for lack of bringing what people into it. They need to treat everybody, builder, developer, anybody with an idea, as a customer. And, try to help them with their process instead of making them claw out everything that they have to do. Case in point, I'm right now, on a development that I'm doing, I'm jumping off here a little bit, but I'm doing a development, you'll get my point. I was gonna do 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath duplexes. We went in, burnt the midnight oil on the weekend and that here about a month and a half ago. We decided we're gonna make them 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath. Currently of what you have, 420 basically people that need that type of housing. I think on the 1-bedrooms, we're up to 610 people. Thing about it is, when somebody does this, the city should be literally trying to do their best, especially if it's on infill property, and not try to have the nickel counters upstairs, try to get every possible dime that they can get out of it. Like I say, in the past, we've had people in the past do the "you greedy builder" situation. It's really not about the money. And in my mode right now, because I'm almost semi-retired, I'm wanting to prove that, for lack of saying this, I want to prove that the city, I really worry about this committee, about really hitting a home run here. Because there's people like me that's out to prove it. Right now, I went to planning staff, guaranteed them that I could build 24 1-bedroom duplexes, 12 1-bedroom duplexes, 24 units. And I'm kind of like going, you mean he's really going to do it? So if we're really serious about stuff, people up here have to get serious, okay? And like I say, if somebody wants to do 2-bedrooms units, 1-bedroom units, they should have another mechanism to fast track this and stuff. I've been in the permit process for a month and a half on my project and that. So it's kind of like, why is that? So, and other than that, every $1,000 that you add to a house, that's $4,800 in a 30-year mortgage. And you add that up, and of course, some of your city folks will sit here and go, well, you're not going to live in it for 30 years. I've been in my house in that for 27 years. Actually, I think our ex-mayor's been in her house for 42 years, which I was amazed at. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, but so there's a lot of people that have been there. And even the younger crowd people, I've had customers now in their houses for close to 20 years, and they're like 44, 45 and stuff. So I'm just saying, and they're making those higher payments and everything else. So I probably need to stop there just because time-wise, but there's some other detailed stuff that hopefully we can get into later. So I'm signing off.
All right, thank you. And I appreciate you talking about the things that you think are worth considering and promoting, and also some things that you think maybe we shouldn't be looking at, and also just kind of general comments. So thank you. So we're gonna kind of go around the screen. So we're gonna go Cameron, Sharon, and Rebecca, and then the next 3 just to get them kind of ready, Theodore, Alana, and Patrick. So yeah, again, what are some of the highest priorities for you? Are there any things missing from the list? Is there anything on the list that you think, is not a good idea for the city to consider moving forward? So Cameron.
Okay, so on my list, as it was noted in the focus groups, probably the most needed housing type is the small entry-level affordable homes. And one of the things about small entry level homes is there are paths to build equity. If you're renting your entire life, you pay rent your entire life, and you have no equity. I know that firsthand from when I was renting versus from when I became a homeowner. So giving people the opportunity to be able to afford an entry level home and build from there is extremely important for people to have long-term financial security as far as affordable housing. For one thing, it also locks in your expense of what you're paying. I'm paying a mortgage from several years ago, which is very cheap compared to the mortgages of today, and that is locked in. My housing cost is not going up every year because it's locked in. And so this entry-level home is a critical need. So a lot of my interests will be focused on the small entry-level homes. And the first part of that is the preservation of the existing entry-level homes that Albany has. Albany has quite a few homes that were built from the late 30s through around the late 60s of little minimal traditional and ranch style homes. Most of these are single level, which makes them easier to convert for accessibility issues because they're not 2 stories. If they're not that way already. And they generally tend to be pretty small. Most of these homes are under 1,500 square feet. A lot of them are around 1,000 square feet. So they're really right in that target of entry-level homes. And they're under threat. A lot of these homes have been demolished recently because the cost of land is so expensive that the land becomes more valuable than the home, and they demolish these homes to build a larger home on it. And so that's why I think 4.7 is one of the key items, and that's preservation of these existing homes through demolition taxes. Not only will that help preserve these homes as affordable resources, but then if they are torn down, those taxes can then be used for other affordable or subsidized housing. And then 5.5 also ties in with that, with the preservation of these existing homes, as well as 5.9. So 4.7, 5.5, and 5.9. And then the next item is tiered system development charges. I think that is something that we need to be doing. When new homes are built, if the land is expensive and there's more profit to be had in making a large house versus a smaller house, then obviously the profit-driven model suggests that you build a larger house. And that's what you see is most new construction in Albany, not all of it, but a lot of it is very large, very nice single-family homes or else apartments. And we need to have tiered system development charges that reward developers that build small entry-level homes and also subsidized housing. So tiered system development charges could be used for both of those. And then my third item would be partnerships with nonprofits and government agencies such as 5.3. I know at the last task force meeting, there was a lot of good ideas presented by some of our existing task force. We have Habitat for Humanity and others. Like Habitat for Humanity, I know they're having a hard time getting lots to build on. So if there can be some assistance provided there. So those are my items. As far as missing items, there's one big missing one that I did not see in here. And that is, as was mentioned last meeting by one of their appraisers here, a lot of the homes being bought right now, and this is nationally, actually, it's happening everywhere in the world, are being bought up by hedge funds out of state, even out of country. And housing is turned into a commodity, which prices people out because they come in all cash. And just treat it as, a stock or anything else, which then prices out people that are actually trying to buy a house to live in. Just last week on April 7, Canada banned foreign investors from buying houses in the entire country, everywhere. You cannot buy a house in Canada right now unless you're a Canadian citizen. That's 2 years moratorium on foreign investment in Canada. Ideally, this should be handled at the federal and state level. However, this is something that we need to be looking at locally as well, is trying to maintain, it's a local issue to us, and as much local control as we can have on it, we should. So that should be one of the items we should be looking at, is regulating outside investment of housing as a commodity in Albany to the maximum extent we can. And then as far as remove, I don't have any one specific item that I would say needs to necessarily be removed. I do have one word of caution though, and that is that building density does not necessarily equal affordability. Some of these I have a little concern, look a little bit like trickle down housing. The problem is that trying to build your way out of this mess assumes there is static demand, and there's not static demand. If you try to build your way out to reduce cost, it actually is going to create more demand, more people from coming to other areas. Having lived in the Bay Area, where housing prices are just horrendous, and unfortunately Oregon is trending that way, they were building 5, 6, 7-story apartment complexes everywhere, and I mean everywhere. And housing prices continued to go up and continued to go up and continued to go up because more people would move in, more people would move in. And it was creating stuff where people were driving 2-3 hours commute time trying to find affordable housing. So density in and of itself is not a solution. Doing certain density in certain areas may help, but in and of itself is not a solution.
All right. Thank you, Cameron. That was great. I will just briefly note that the reason you don't see kind of regulation of foreign investment on the list is because that is something typically handled at the federal level. It's very difficult for local communities to do that without running afoul of federal and state laws. So I'm not saying we shouldn't look at that at the local level, but that's why it's not on the list, because it's pretty tough to do within our national.
I understand that. And there's why I'm thinking we may need to look at that very creatively.
So appreciate the comments on that though. Yeah. All right. So let's go to Sharon, then Rebecca, Theodore.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. I could go on and on here, folks. Let me start off. And it wasn't 43 years in my house. I've been 45 years in my house. So kind of really rare. You don't see that very often. Also, we do right now see a lot of the need for 1-bedrooms, but I kind of want to mention that trend always changes. Like this year or last year was more 1-bedrooms, but with Albany Partnership in Housing, we're starting to see more of a need for our 2-bedrooms, is more on our waiting list. So trends will always change within the needs for housing. So going through the list, I thought staff did a really good job, and Matt also, and really coming up and kind of identifying kind of a lot of the strategies. And I know a lot of it came from the subcommittees too that gave their input. I do see a lot that I feel should be removed. And I think the reason some of this should be removed is some of it is the compliance. If you're really going to focus on it to be more for lower income, below the median income, where is your, and if it's going to be rent restricted, who's going to oversee that compliance? And I can, when I go on with some of mine, I'll kind of touch base on some of that, but there does need to be an entity that's funded that is going to certify tenants, or if it's homeownership, to make sure they're going to be in compliance. And most, if it's going to be a property that would be rent restricted long-term, you have to have that annual certification of each tenant to make sure that they comply with their income restrictions on that. So I think a lot of it with this with the task force here, I really think kind of the priority should be that rent burden households. And that's what we were really seeing, was the big demand was people were finding, they were not finding places that were affordable to rent. If it's going to be for the home ownership, so the strategies in here for home ownerships, a lot of that needs to be a state program. So it's applied statewide. If Albany's all of a sudden starts giving incentives for the $200,000 or $250,000 home to purchase, then we're just going to have people move into Albany because they're going to want to tap into that bargain. So a lot of it, so with it too, I kind of focused on, we don't need to build to be able to add for rent burdened households or even for home ownership. That can be done in purchasing an existing apartment complex and transforming that into rent restricted housing. The same for even home ownership is taking existing stock and making that affordable. So what I came up with looking through the strategies, and my number one was the 3.3, and that's the tax abatement. Like just with Albany Partnership properties, we don't have all of ours that are fully tax exempt. And some of them by state law, it has to be 51% of the taxing districts. But if you are renting out a property, then you no longer can qualify with the state. So you have to go to the legislature to get your property tax exempt. Lynn Benton Housing Authority they have already been set up with the county to be able to get their properties as fully tax exempt. That is one way to take an existing stock of, say, an apartment complex, and if it was purchased by a nonprofit to fully guarantee rent restrictions, then if you got tax abatement, tax exemption on it, that would help to be able to make the property more affordable. That was my number one. Number two, I really like the 4.2 on getting bonds. I mean, bonds would have to go to the voters, but if you structured it where it does not cost taxpayers, it's fully going to be supported off of say a project or a new housing project to be able to get the municipal bonds. And the reason I really like seeing that is it's very challenging for nonprofits and going through getting tax credit properties, getting everything through OHCS and the additional layers of regulations and also loads of declarations they put onto each property. It adds a lot of administrative cost to that nonprofit. Also with that, it's very challenging to get loans with the banks now when it comes to rent restricted properties. So an example is we got a rehab loan on one of our properties. The property had appraised at 7.4 million, and the bank would only appraise it as 1/3 of the cost because the rent restrictions still had to be for lower income for 50 more years on that property. So it's not real favorable for banks to want to loan to rent restricted properties. So if we really want to see about being able to provide more rent restricted properties in our community, we need to look at the funding piece to that and see about if getting municipal bonds would be great for that. Okay, my third one would be the inclusion zoning, and I've said this for years is that and we've missed the boat with all the massive amount of apartments that have been built in Albany the last several years, that say if it's a property that is going to have more than 20 units or more, that they have to set aside 5% or 10% of those units to be for a tenant with a housing voucher. The easy way for that to be staying in compliance would end up being the housing authority would know of a new property or that came online. They would always know that say X amount, there might have to be 5 units for that property, will always have to have a housing voucher. It cannot be applied per one particular unit. You would have to apply it per property because when a tenant is on a housing voucher, if they no longer qualify and their income increases and they don't they don't qualify for a voucher, but they still can pay market rate rent. So you cannot evict them out of that unit. So, so that was my number 3. Number 4 is I do like that construction excise tax, and many communities have done that. And that would be getting a pot of funds to be able to do projects, to be able to do low income housing projects. Right now, the city doesn't have any funds for that except for the CDBG. So it's a big wish list if we think there is going to be a big pot of funds, but I don't have high hopes that we'll be seeing that. But that would also end up going with the construction excise tax would be the public-private partnerships. That part would be, then you could be able to apply and have that pot of funds from the public to be able to work with nonprofits for providing the low-income housing on that. So that was my 5 that I have. I do know for sure one that I saw here for the TIF funding. That's if we do any sort of urban renewal, that has to go to the voters. And I don't even think we should even have that one on the list. But what I could do is go through and send that to staff of what I feel should be removed, or that is, in my opinion, is going down a path that I don't think is going to be really a benefit for making sure we can reach our goal of affordable housing.
All right, thank you. And I would say, yes, we'd be happy to have you send us kind of that list as a follow-up to the meeting. That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah. All
Will
right.
do. Thanks.
Thanks. All right. So we're going to go to Rebecca and then Theodore and then Alana.
So I love what everybody's already said. I will try not to take too much time. I'm looking at things from a lender perspective, and primarily today would be on residential. The ones that kind of stuck out for me it's kind of a combination of them. So for instance, 1.4, 1.5 on the flexibility of ADUs and the tiny homes. They're so much less expensive for a borrower to potentially purchase, and you can put a lot more in a small space. And so a lot of these folks that might not necessarily have the income to afford the $300,000, $400,000 homes might be able to afford a tiny home in a park, or the college kid that's making minimum wage may be able to, if a homeowner can put an ADU in their backyard or whatnot, they might be able to afford something like that, to rent it out to a college student or somebody to help that housing piece for those that may not be able to afford a home. 1.3, I wholly think that supporting the building of the smaller units, and I think it was Cameron who said something about entry-level homes. I think that would be something that's on the top of my list, only because, again, from a lender standpoint, we see a lot of folks who are in need of those smaller homes to get started. They are more affordable typically this day and age. I think things are really overpriced. Because of the housing boom, the pricing increases. But I think the smaller units, there's still just a lack of inventory right now for folks to get qualified for. Financial incentives, what can the city do to attract more builders that were willing to do the smaller builds? And so I think that's a huge one that really was under 3.6 for financial incentives. And then I find that the potentially evaluating the mixed use and commercial zone properties for the housing capacity might be an interesting area to really look into. There was one of them, and I apologize, I don't remember the actual number, but it was talking about the maybe commercial properties that were not necessarily being used right now. Maybe looking and seeing what kind of opportunities are there for types of housing. Maybe rather than building, we look at what's on.
Who's the speaker? Oh, uh-oh.
Rebecca.
Froze up.
Rebecca, okay.
Rebecca,
sorry?
you froze for just a second on us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what all you heard.
You had started to talk about liking the strategy around evaluating mixed use and commercial zones for housing capacity.
Yeah, I just think it would be interesting for those properties that were not necessarily being utilized or maybe we're sitting empty or whatnot, maybe re-looking at those to see what kind of capacity they have for providing some form of housing. So rather than, if we're not able to build more in a lot of areas, looking at what we have and reanalyzing what they could be used as. I don't have any kind of expertise on, a lot of the taxes and construction and things like that. So I'm not sure if there is anything missing from the list, in my opinion. I don't necessarily think there's anything in there that I would say would be not a good idea. There was a huge amount of information that I thought a lot of it was really good ideas.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And just for folks' reference, the last strategy Rebecca was talking about was number 1.12 on page 4 of the packet. So yeah, that was great. All right, Theodore.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know, my name is Ted Bunch, and I am on the City of Albany's Planning Commission. Although today I am not coming to you from a planning commissioner perspective, that is something I need to think about going forward in terms of how I can engage the entire planning commission in this endeavor. I do know that we did have a planning commissioner who participated in one of the focus groups. And so having said that, I guess not going to provide a lot of commentary. However, one of the first ones that I did want to advocate for is 3.3, scrolling, tax abatements. The next one I would like to highlight is 3.9, expedite permitting for affordable and needed housing. Next one is going to be 5.2. I believe that was mentioned prior in terms of public-private partnerships. And kind of associated with that, and I haven't really heard this one mentioned and don't know how valuable this commentary might be, but I'm a fan of 5.4, the employer-assisted housing programs. I know that that might be a burden on our local employers, but I think that that's an area that we could explore.
Awesome. Thank you. Ted, anything from your perspective missing or just that you think's kind of a non-starter?
No, I found the list of strategies that were put together extremely impressive. I'll just leave you with that, and thank you for your efforts.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, and also really appreciate kind of future efforts to reach out, as you say, to the rest of the Planning Commission and pull them into the discussion. That's one of the reasons we're happy to have you on the group. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We'll go with Alana and then Patrick and then Aaron.
All right. I have been taking notes. I would be curious to see people's top priorities all spread out with the actual number codes. I resonated with, I believe it was Mike who spoke early on around 4.1, the construction excise tax. While I also respect and appreciate the need for funding, I think there's more creative ways that we could do that would be less directly deterrent to builders, such as a tax on cash purchases, both for the seller and the buyer, or a tax on house purchases over a certain price, say over $550K. Those have some sort of tax levied on them, or how taxing hedge fund or corporate buyers. Yeah. Again, wanting to keep the focus on enabling entry-level, senior, smaller, et cetera, homes as much as possible. I guess I'll note the ones of the ones that I found most interesting, I will note the ones that other people thus far have also stated: 1.5, 2.2, 2.3, 5.6, 3.6. The SCCs, tiered SCCs, seem to be a really good first step and kind of low hanging fruit. There's a lot of other ones that I found interesting. I think something that I see as missing, well, just this note is from the focus group that I was in. Somebody else said it in regards to parking, and I don't think it was accurately represented at the beginning in the overview of those, which is that not saying to eliminate parking restrictions, but saying if we could have some housing that doesn't charge the resident for parking, say if that apartment resident doesn't have a car. So ways to incentivize lifestyles that use public transportation, on how does housing interface with that? That's maybe a bigger scale picture. But I am interested in that big picture landscape of Albany, and some of these. There's a variety of these pieces that touch on what land do we want to develop? Are we repurposing? Are we revitalizing? I'm curious about that big picture, and I would be interested in joining conversations about that. I think there is a reason that annexation takes time, and bringing new land into the urban growth boundary should have some thought around it and not be inherently expedited. I'm not saying there can't be exceptions to that. The last thing I will add, that I don't see considered in here, I've seen examples of, I think they're called safe parks in Corvallis and in Eugene as a piece of addressing houseless population. And I'm curious also Albany's numbers of how much money is spent on law enforcement, detention, and city cleanup around the houseless population, and if some of that money could be shifted to like a stable place for tents. I think those are my main points.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you kind of bringing up some of those, as you say, larger landscape issues for us, and good kind of food for thought moving forward. So thank you. All right, Patrick, your thoughts?
Hey, thanks, Matt and everybody. Just excellent comments. Elena, in particular, you hit on many of the points I was thinking of. All of you really have. Really, the top of the list resonates with me. I mean, I'm the LCD guy, so I'm thinking about minimum densities in your higher density zones, but doing it in a way where you don't say no to development, but you would require the placement of that initial unit or those initial units to be in such a way where it wouldn't take away from the ability to build additional units on that higher density property later. So being smart, and parking, ensuring that parking doesn't become more important than building units. I really liked Elena's comment about like the culture. I really feel like Oregonians deserve, they have a right to have parking requirements decoupled from housing or zoning standards. Not everybody should be required, in my opinion, to have a vehicle to survive. And in fact, some people don't drive. Some people don't want to drive. So I feel like as a profession, we have made a big error in integrating all of these parking requirements into the government's responsibility to tell developers or property owners how much parking they need. No, I think the market should be able to provide that in some degree, and we need to ensure that we aren't requiring 1 or 2 parking spaces for every unit, because that's just unfair for the people that don't drive, or people that don't want to drive. 1.3, smaller units, smaller lots. That'd be my third one. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 for me. Adaptive reuse, 5.8. Adaptive reuse of buildings really stands out as a item that really deserves more attention. And then I would just, the fifth point I would end with is 5.3, the public-private partnerships, the CLTs, that I believe, and I've already forgotten what CLT even means. I'm sorry. My point is housing cooperatives. I don't think housing cooperatives are missed. I think they're included in that 5.3 bullet, but that would be one item that I would want to ensure that Albany and all of our cities have some degree of focus on as a way for folks to build equity in a non-traditional, non-fee simple title or condominium way of ownership. And I appreciate having a chance to chime in. I was just planning on actively listening, but those are top of mind for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Patrick. And I think CLT probably stands for community interest. So, all right. Aaron, we're gonna go with Aaron, and then I think Jonathan, and then anybody I may have missed.
Everybody, Aaron Day, Director of Real Estate for Devon Northwest, so affordable housing developer. So I just approach this from the form of the perspective of how to increase the affordable housing stock kind of as soon as possible. And so for me, I like most of 2 and 3, especially 2.2 and 2.3. Anything that would help get some lands for some of these new developments and also help with development costs directly. Obviously, also a big fan of 5.3 because that's a big part of the work that we do. So I'm going to strongly advocate for those points in particular. When it comes to funding, 4.5 home funding is pretty key. Most of the cities and jurisdictions where we work, we have pretty strong partnerships with the city and really utilize those home funds and leverage those for state funds and federal funds. So other federal funds. So definitely home funding. Along those same lines, CDBG in general for new development is only really helpful for acquisition. It's not really helpful for the building side. It triggers a couple of things that make development a bit more complicated. So 4.5 in particular. For 4.1 through 4.3, those are interesting strategies, and we work in jurisdictions that definitely have some of those strategies in place. I would say sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not. It depends on the amount of funds actually being offered through that, and then also the restrictions and the compliance in the application. So basically all the hoops. So sometimes cities work really hard to do 4.1 and 4.3, and then the buckets of funds are really low for all the amount of work that has to go into doing it. And so sometimes affordable developers will opt out of utilizing those sources. So I would say be strategic with 4.1 or 4.3. And then let's see, what else did I have? Oh, I've heard a lot of folks talk about like preservation and redevelopment and strategic reuse. I am 100% in your camp on a personal level. I think that that's amazing. And there are some restrictions in a little bit of barriers from the availability of funds to support preservation projects and redevelopment projects. There's a lot more funding available for affordable housing that comes through the state and the federal level for either new construction or significant redevelopment. It's much harder to get those dollars for just to preserve existing units. There are actually no funding sources available from the state of Oregon to preserve or to utilize existing homeownership units, at least in the development phase. So that's just important to note. And then I would say the manufactured housing, again, I'm a big fan from a personal level. I think that's an industry that's increasing in popularity and also just in terms of affordability. But there are still some pretty significant hoops from an appraisal standpoint and a funding perspective for folks to get mortgages for manufactured houses, even though technically they're allowed to do it. It's actually quite difficult to get some of those things through. So those are my overall comments. In general, I think it's a pretty comprehensive list. I think you all took a lot of the feedback and really put all those things in. I would say, those are the bulk of my comments. But again, my perspective is really focusing on how to increase the affordable housing stock almost immediately. I think the one last thing I would say is modifying the design standards and the zoning and the parking and all of that, while it definitely is important and can definitely help move the process along, I would not prioritize that over some of the other things that I mentioned, only because I think while you make those shifts that could have helped affordable developers, they also help non-affordable developers. So there's a little bit of a across the board, it makes it a little bit easier. So and most of those things can be resolved depending on the site. So, but that's just my 2 cents. So, you know, take it or leave it. Thanks for the opportunity to add in.
All right, thank you, Erin. So I'm going to make a couple of quick comments. One, I'm going to give Kate a heads up that I appreciated Alana's suggestion that we tell you what kind of things were among the top priorities. And I know she's been taking better notes than me, so I'm going to ask her to do that in a minute. So that's the reason for the heads up. Jonathan informed me that he supports staff, so I'm not going to have him go next. So I think we've heard from everybody around the table and room that's not staff or a consultant. So I'll make just a few observations, and I'm going to ask Kate to tell us kind of what were the things, if she can fairly quickly summarize the things that rose to the top for folks, that'd be great. And then I think we'll just open it up for additional comments from people, just reactions to things you've heard or other thoughts that we should be keeping in mind as we move forward, et cetera. I think we'll do the same thing we did before. First, we'll hear from the folks in City Hall around the table, and then we'll hear from folks around the screen. Matthew will kind of help call on people at the table, and I'll look for your hands up, either the little virtual hand or your actual hands up around the screen to call on folks there. So just kind of a couple things I would note. I think in terms of missing things, I think I heard from a number of you, it's a good comprehensive list, not too many things missing. I think the things I did hear that were missing were some efforts to kind of address the issues that were raised about money coming in from outside the community to purchase housing, whether it's some kind of limitation on the ability to do that, or some kind of tax on cash purchases, or there were a number of things mentioned around that. So I'll just kind of note that. That was kind of the main thing I heard that was missing from the list. And, you know, I heard some mixed reviews on sort of things that maybe should or shouldn't be on the list. So appreciate the comments on that. You know, we'll take kind of a further look at those. And then I also heard just a few things in terms of kind of, I like to say, or one of the other folks I work with likes to say, devil's in the details. So some of these things may be great ideas and have a certain amount of merit, but we need to think about how would they be implemented in Albany, and do they really have like a good positive sort of, you know, benefit cost ratio or analysis. So I think that's important for us to be kind of continuing to think about as we move forward. So those are just a few quick observations from me. And we will be putting together a summary of the meeting for everybody. And I would also say that it will, you know, we'll meet until 2 unless y'all run out of things to tell us. And then we would welcome any other comments, you know, after the meeting as well too. So, and we are also going to just send out a quick survey for you to answer some of the same questions you answered today, particularly if there are things you want to add, or for people who weren't able to attend the meeting. So I'll just note that Kate noted that earlier. So now I'm going to pick on Kate, see if she can give us a quick roundup of kind of what things rose to the top, and then we'll just see what else people have to say. So
I'll do my best. I did not take notes in a way that made it really easy to kind of count up how many people supported like certain strategies. But I would say overall, we didn't hear as much discussion of the kind of Category 1 development code regulatory strategies. I know Patrick was a big supporter of that group of strategies, but more so, and we heard some discussion of like facilitating middle housing and accessory dwelling units, but a lot of discussion of land supply strategies. So using sort of surplus excess land that's, you know, kind of underutilized, repurposing that for housing, also repurposing existing potentially commercial buildings that could be reused for housing. That's, I think, more in the Category 5. A lot of support for the Category 3 financial and regulatory incentives, especially things like tax abatements. I think a couple people mentioned that. SDC, kind of scaling SDCs based on unit size and, reduce SDCs for affordable housing, expedited permitting. There's sort of mixed support and opposition to the construction excise tax. So I think we'll want to kind of think a little further about that, as well as tax increment financing. And this is in the funding sources category. Some support for the federal home program. I'm just kind of running through the list here. A lot of support for public-private partnerships and community land trusts in the programs and partnerships category. Preservation of existing low-cost housing that was supported by several folks. Some support for supporting and preserving existing manufactured housing stock. Yeah, that's what I've got. I don't know if that's really, if that really captures it. I think I'll do a better job later when I can look through my notes and kind of make a tally, but that's generally what I heard.
Thank you, Kate. And sorry to put you on the spot there, but appreciate that. So again, I think let's spend some time just hearing if people have other comments, other thoughts, particularly anything that kind of, made you think of something as you heard other people talk that you didn't get to say initially. So I don't know if Matthew's still at the table, but let's hear from the folks in City Hall there first. And then again, around the screen, raise your hand in some fashion and we'll call on you that way as well. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, Matt, I got a question because you're kind of like the lightning rod here. I've been on a couple task force over the years. One that comes up to me is 2001 when we did a development code. We had the same strategy and we met probably 8 times. There's 17 of us on this committee. And they really weren't handpicked. It was just the same people wanting to come in and do their part for the city. It wasn't until a couple of years later when we had other mayors that said that they want council people to pick this person, that person, and so on. My question to you, because it wasn't a nightmare back then, but all the things that we said, I would say just the regular away from staff here and stuff. We ended up with a development code that was far different than what we had talked about in the committee. So my question is to you, because you're the lightning rod from what I see right now. There's a substantial amount of stuff here, okay? And you know that there's really going to be, because we're talking about affordable housing, which has a lot of definitions. And there's a lot of other stuff that's been put in here. My question to you is, when we get down to the last meeting, 2 meetings, whatever, before something goes before our mayor and our councilors and stuff to adopt, who really is going to pick that? Are you going to go with what staff, because we have more staff than what I thought, on a situation like this. And so I'm in a way worried of where we're going to end up at. And I'm sure we'll have probably 3, 4, 5 more meetings, whatever it takes to do this. And you're going to be doing some recommendations. So my curiosity is, from your experience, what have you done with other cities in this same thing? And is there a way that you could project to either me in an email, our whole task force here, what you've done in the past with cities the same size or so on, or do you have that experience?
Sure. So I'll take a shot at it. And then I do want to see if Ann or Matthew or others have anything to add. But I'll take the first shot. So you're right. There's a lot of stuff that we presented you with in terms of a variety of strategies. And I think, the mayor talked about this both today and at the last meeting. We're talking about housing affordability overall, and that does include what a lot of people would describe as affordable housing, which often they mean housing that's affordable to people in low or even moderate income ranges. And I think we need to be looking at both types of things. Our goal is to look at how to meet a full range of housing needs across the city. I think the reality is that the most sort of city or public intervention or subsidy ends up needing to be to some degree around housing that's affordable to people in the lowest income ranges, simply because the market can't produce that without some kind of, the private market, housing market can't produce that without some intervention. So that ends up being where a lot of the sort of discussion comes in, but we are trying to look at this more broadly. I think when we get to the end of this process, we need to have some pretty concrete recommended actions for the city to undertake and or work with other community organizations to undertake. I mean, that's really our ultimate goal. You all provide a lot of different perspectives and bases of knowledge about these issues. So you are here to guide our work. Will we come up with a set of recommendations that every single person in this group says, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to see? Probably not. It's probably pretty difficult to do. And that is sort of the job of staff and the members of the consulting team, is to do our best to balance what we're hearing from you all, and to come up with, and we will review the recommendations at the end as we kind of, I'll say, to some degree narrow, but make some of the recommendations more specific and actionable. I mean, that's kind of what we'll be working with you to try to do, but we're starting out with, yeah, a pretty broad range or large menu of strategies. So we want to get a sense of, okay, what's sort of the universe of things we can look at, but then ultimately what makes the most sense for the city, again, and its partners to pursue or enable others to pursue. So we will have discussions with you at the end of before we recommend something move forward to Planning Commission and Council about your opinions about what we've come up with. But there's kind of always going to need to be a certain amount of balancing of that by staff consultants, and then ultimately a decision by Planning Commission and Council about what to move forward with. So that's not maybe an awesome answer for you, but, and that is the kind of process I would say we tend to manage or facilitate in other communities around the state. And we are doing similar work on these types of projects in other places around the state, both at this kind of broader level, but then also at some more specific levels around things like middle housing, et cetera. Again, I don't know if that gets at what you were trying to ask me, but, or were asking me, but that's what I can tell you for now. Is that helpful?
It does. I'm just hoping that, you know, we, like I say, we're talking 20 years ago, and we took a very simple, we had some really great people there. We came up with great answers. What ended up happening is that there, and we didn't have consultants back then. We had staff, and staff went and wrote a development code that still today we fight almost on every project and stuff. And we have to literally dig out, the answers are there, but you've got to go through 5 doors to get to the answer, where I'm basically saying, whatever we do here, we need to make it simplistic. This could get very complicated in that if we even try to do 50% of it, say, and we might not even get the 50%, it might be 30% stuff. But I'm just saying, to make it less complicated, where the average person can come up in that and sit there and ask a question, and you just get this blank answer, but you know better, and then you have to go in and dig and do a bunch more research instead of having staff just tell you, well, you know, here's a way that you could do it. If you're doing an affordable housing project, we've got this A, B, and C product here, and you're off to the races. I find for 40 years building in this town that I don't think I've ever had a project that I was given an answer that I sit there and I go, well, there's something different there, and I got to dig through and try to find the archive part of what was meant when it was incepted and stuff. So I'm just trying to keep it simple on that for everybody, because this could get very complicated.
Yeah, and I think fair questions and comments, and a great goal, you know, at least in terms of being able to articulate the message and the priorities in a way that, you know, everybody can understand around a very complicated set of issues. I mean, I think because that's the reality, is a very complicated set of issues. So I appreciate the comments. Any other thoughts from City Hall there, and then we'll see if other folks around the screen have things to add.
Steve?
This is Stephen Hammond. What I have is some questions that include some comments, and I won't identify the person because I can't remember. There was a comment about making existing stock or taking existing stock and making it affordable. And I'm not sure how that really works. There was a comment about well, we can't build out of it. We can't build, and that doesn't seem quite right because it seems like you have to build.
Increase inventory to reduce your costs, yeah.
Yeah, and then the idea about public transportation in Albany. It seems like we don't have a lot of public transportation in Albany. As far as I know, there's a bus route, 2 bus routes.
Still
but
in its
that's-
infancy.
Yeah. So those are just thoughts I had in terms of how do you, does that help define our direction anyway? In terms of building, in terms of if you're using existing stock and making it affordable, does that mean that people that have already bought are not going to be able to use the equities that they have built up? Or how does that work? So somebody's smarter than me, I have to answer that.
Well, I know that there was one time talk about giving incentives. This was futuristically about a year ago, giving incentives that if you could build near the mobile line and stuff like that, so people could get on there, that there would be an incentive towards that because then you don't have to have as much parking. That was parking wars 2020 or whatever it was, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I'll note that around kind of preserving existing stock, there are a couple of specific strategies I'll mention. And one would be that the city or somebody else purchase some of that housing stock and then maintain it at a price point that's affordable to people in certain income ranges. So that's one. You got to have money to do that. The second is that the city provide some kind of incentive or subsidy when somebody wants to rehabilitate or renovate some existing stock in exchange for, again, continuing to rent that stock. It's often rental properties at a price point affordable to people in a certain income range, whatever that is. So those are a couple of things I'll throw out there. And then I'll just kind of leave it to other folks as they kind of raise their hands or chime in on the conversation if they have other.
One last thing. I've been talking to a couple banks lately because some of the banking in Albany is changing some hands and stuff. And everybody's out there asking about, well, what kind of products do your builders need? I will tell you one thing right now. Our fight right now is, even though we usually have to, for construction money, we'll go out of town, we'll go to Portland. It's with banks that are here in Albany, but they don't do the business here in Albany and stuff.
Right.
But what we're up against is that basically, for lack of term, is Wall Street money. You've got 3 major developers in Albany right now, and they can literally $5 million, the 20-minute phone call. And I've had one of the project managers tell me it's a carte blanche in that. There's so much money, whereas the regular smaller builder that, and it's a key thing in my world, that gives back to the community, be it the Boys Club, Helping Hands, your churches and so on. These major people don't do that. So we have a banking problem too with trying to create this housing and stuff. And there's some housing that some of them sit there and say that, well, we're really not kind of interested in that because it's not profitable for them too. So.
Yeah, appreciate the comments. I want to hear from the mayor. Do you have any comments? Go around the screen.
So for me, I just think that I appreciate the conversation coming from all the different parties. I think it's a great place to start. I do have Mike's fear of this not materializing into a strategy to encompass the entire housing affordability spectrum. So I think we should be going in the direction of how can we impact the most amount of people with affordable housing that's affordable from, like, to the entry level to the senior that wants to stay age in place in smaller residence, which then gets that inventory moving. I know I talked to real estate folks and brokers for mortgages, and one that really impressed me, she had a notebook of the housing market going back to like 1980 on a daily basis or weekly basis, what's housing available. And she could literally give this to a master's student and put together a great picture of Albany's housing over the last 35 years. So I think that we should keep an open mind. and listen to each other and work this to where we can come out of this with a strategy that our citizens are going to support and also appreciate, because, you know, the kids I've refereed over the last 25 years of football don't live here because housing's not affordable, and we also need to create jobs. And so I think if we work as a team, not our own things that we want, but also listen to other folks with other ideas, with things that they'd like to accomplish as well. So I think being more consensus building, and I think we have a good start. I've got great people on the team, and we should just listen to each other and keep an open mind. I think that's important.
All right, thank you. Sharon, you've had your hand up for a little while, so let's hear from you, and then we'll see if other people have anything to add as well.
Okay. So the one thing I was wanting to know is if we could add or change a little bit on 4.2, which is the general obligation bonds for affordable housing. So this one has really sparked my interest. And instead of having it just say for new construction, it would be for existing, existing stock also. So the thing would be is if you go to a general obligation bond, you have to get it passed by the voters, but then you've got a pot of money to be able to work, and it would be pre-planned before you went to the voters. But then you could be looking at where those funds would be going. But instead of having it only geared for new construction, it would be for existing apartments. And I think Steve had the question on how would you kind of transform that. What you can do is if you have, say, a nonprofit that would be purchasing an existing apartment complex, and then they would be transforming it into rent restricted housing. So then you would end up getting pretty much, if you got good favorable funding to be able to keep your rents down, to be able to get tax exemption would help to keep your rents down. And then a nonprofit is not looking for profit off of the rents off that tenant. So it can be done. Our probably biggest cash flow property we have with Albany Partnership is a 50-year-old property that was purchased. That was an existing one that we had purchased. So that's kind of clarifying his question on that. And also, I know Steve had that question on the mobile home parks, which was a great question. That is something that could be a piece out of this general obligation bond, is if you had a nonprofit work with purchasing existing manufactured home parks to keep them as nonprofit where they can keep the rents down. So my folks lived for like 30 years in one of them here in town, and their rents, went up every year, and it was very hard on the seniors that lived in these manufactured home parks. I call them senior citizen traps, because once you get in and invest in your mobile home, then you have no control over how much the rent is going to be for the land that you're that you're owning your mobile home on. So that is something that I really think this general obligation bonds for affordable housing should really be one of the top priorities out of this committee, because there's a lot that we can be able to do with that. Also, I wanted to mention that no matter what this committee comes out with the recommendation, it can always be changed at the council level. So we have no guarantee on that piece, but hopefully the outcome is very favorable. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think really good point on that strategy 4.2. It's written somewhat narrowly, the description, and there's not a lot of cities in Oregon who have gone out and done that, but some have, and they actually have used those monies a little more flexibly. They're not always just for new construction. They can be for use to purchase and or rehabilitate existing housing as well. So I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think we can describe that in a little more general terms.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else have things to add to the conversation today? I haven't seen other virtual hands up, but let's see. Cameron, yeah.
So someone was asking about the whole density and building our way out of it. I want to clarify that a little bit because I don't think that was completely understood. This is kind of a big picture view in that if you don't have a static environment or static demand, which we don't, just by building does not necessarily mean that housing becomes more affordable, that if you have more units, that they become more affordable, because you can still have people moving into that area that then continues to increase the demand. And so then you don't have this excess of housing to bring prices down. And there's a couple of examples of this. You know, having spent a year living in the Silicon Valley area of California and getting to see this firsthand, you know, there were apartment complexes and middle housing, sky rises, you know, you name it, just going up everywhere. And this was not bringing housing prices down. They continued to go up and up and up. And the reason for that was that, you know, it's not a static demand. There's more people moving to that area. And it was causing, you know, displacement because most of the stuff that was being built was tending to be higher end stuff, you know, higher end apartments, that kind of stuff. So when I was there, and this was 7 years ago now, you know, we had a small 2-bedroom house, what would be considered an entry-level home here. The rent on it was $3,500 per month for that little house, 1,000 square feet, 2-bedroom. But a lot of the apartments that were brand new being built, 1 2-bedroom, were the same price, $3,000, $3,500 a month. And after we left, they went up to like $4,000 a month. So they continued to climb, even though these were being built. Same thing in Portland. Portland, they'll tear down, you know, a single family home, build 8-unit complex in their condos. And each one of those single condos ends up selling for more than what that single family home did. So, you know, building stuff, obviously, if you don't build anything, you've got demand, yeah, prices are going to go up. I'm just trying to clarify from a big picture view, in and of itself, market rate building density will not solve affordability if there's more demand coming in, if it's a non-static environment like we have. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, think just all this data, a couple of things to that. One is that there is a demand for additional housing there because there's expected growth. So there is a need to continue to providing that or addressing that. And I think you acknowledge that. So, and there also is there's been a fair bit of research done at kind of the statewide level about just the failure of the housing construction to keep up with the demand within the state throughout the state. And so that's part of the equation around rising prices. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you just said. I'm just kind of tossing in, there are some other factors that go into the impact of additional supply on pricing and availability. But you're also right in that, like, just building more doesn't necessarily reduce the prices, and certainly not in the short term. Over the longer term,
the right mix, and also not everybody wants to buy a home.
Can have some positive impact. So anyway, stop there. So anybody else from kind of around the screen have anything to add to the conversation? I'm gonna make sure we get everybody around the screen before I go back to City Hall there, just to make sure everybody gets a chance to weigh in if they have anything to add, and then we can go back to the table there in City Hall. So anybody else? Maybe you can physically raise. Yeah. Hold on. Oh, I didn't see your hand up.
Okay. So something that I think is missing from the strategy menu, not a strategy, but a piece of the information about the strategies, is how much work do these individual items take to implement? I don't have experience at a city level, right? So take 1.15, legalize alternative housing types on wheels and in parks. You know, is that a relatively simple thing? You know, so having a sense of how big or effortful individual pieces are to help us understand what is low-hanging fruit seems useful. And then, I mean, some of the things the city's already doing, and are they going to continue to, is the city going to continue to do those things? And then, yeah, how much money does it take to implement a strategy, right? If it takes like 10 or 20 hours of staff time at the city versus like 3 years of waiting, that's a big difference. I think on the density conversation and the size of housing conversation, to my knowledge, don't have a tiny home village in Albany yet. And we also don't know how much demand there will be for those small houses. I'm really curious, is there a way that we could prioritize one of those developments to get it on the ground somehow, to be able to see how that affects our housing demand? Because I know a lot of people who would love to own their own home, but right now are taking up rental stock because they can't, pass even $100,000. But how much does a tiny home cost, right? Or they would be willing to build their own or things like that. I really appreciated Sharon's information about what type of funding is harder to get or easier to get. I guess the other piece of information that feels missing there is what funding does the city currently have? And then which of these proposed strategies bring funding and how much funding is available through those? Those are more information seeking.
Yeah, those are all, I think, excellent thoughts and questions. And I mean, my response would be, we're not quite there yet, right? That's part of our next steps, is to identify and compare some of exactly those types of things you mentioned. We knew we were giving you a lot of information. We don't have quite all the information to some degree, and we also wanted to at least get a start on, look, here's the range, but we haven't gone through some of the kinds of analyses you're talking about yet. It doesn't mean we're not going to. We will provide some more of that information as we move forward. But first, we wanted to just kind of put the list out there, give you a little basic information about, who's helped by these strategies, who's the lead, and, has this been considered previously? But I think, yeah, a lot of really good questions there. So thank you. Anybody else?
And do you want me to send you I have taken note of every strategy number that's been mentioned and how many times different people have mentioned it. If you want that, I could send that.
Please go ahead and do that. I know Kate actually did also take notes. It just wasn't done in a super.
We have the notes. I have the notes, and we're going to be asking you guys to complete a survey and give us that information again and add to it if you have more thoughts. So I have been putting everybody's name by each strategy. So I've been doing that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Anybody else that hasn't gotten to add anything kind of again around the screen? And then we'll go back to City Hall because I think there are a couple more comments there. If I don't see a little virtual hand or a physical hand. All right, back to City Hall.
One thing that we didn't really talk about was homelessness in Albany. Recently, there's just been a barrage of money thrown out to everybody. Albany's getting $1 million. Corvallis is getting $1 million. I actually listened in on a meeting with Corvallis about they actually are going to try to create some staff positions to be able to deal with homelessness over there. Knowing our shelter here very well, we're getting $1 million here. My rural Albany should just turn the money over to them. They've actually been trying to do a 48-unit transitional housing project. It's been on the board for probably 10 years. It does have to have some legislative money in that put in on it. They do have the land and everything else. So with this group here, if we want to address something on homelessness, we have some professionals right here. Helping Hands is the best around. For us to hopefully Albany, I'm actually doing a little lobbying effort here because I am sitting across from the mayor. The fact is that maybe we need to sit there instead of gaining more staff and using this money up for staff time, get them involved in stuff, because I've been hammering them down there. They need to come and talk about taking that money either as a down payment towards, their futuristic project. I mean, they've got actually, they've really got some great pictures and plans and everything else. And I think that off our committee, we could really mirror towards, hey, send that money down the road over here, let them try to figure out something. I don't think staff can solve a problem as much as they have in Albany. That's my thing on homelessness.
Thank you. I think, yeah, really good points. And I think we'll want to, as a follow-up to this meeting, kind of go back and have a conversation with staff and the consulting team about how we sort of weave that into the conversation. So I think I appreciate the comments on that.
So I wanted to address, Alana asked about Tiny Home Village. I know that Creative Housing Coalition has raised almost $2 million to build a tiny home village in the city of Albany. And so I know they've looked at land and we're going through some assessments, I believe, still. And so if she'd like more information about that, I can give her contact information for that person. You can reach out to me anytime you'd like, Alana. My number is 541-730-5064. We can have a conversation about that. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So we got about 15 minutes left. It's possible y'all are most of the way talked out, because I haven't seen too many additional hands up, which is okay. We definitely want to leave like 5 minutes for just kind of wrap up and next steps, see if Ann or Matthew have anything to add, but I'm going to take kind of one last call for just any further comments, things for us to be thinking about as we move forward before we do that. So anybody else? All right, well, I'm going to let Ann and Matthew just kind of provide any observations they might have. And then we'll just do, again, kind of a quick, here's what the next steps are. And also I'll just say now, and I'll say it again later, that I really appreciate all the comments and kind of thoughtful review of what we've provided so far, and kind of keep up the good work is what I would say on that. But yeah, Ann or Matthew, anything from your perspective?
So before Ann jumps in, I would just wanted to say that, I really appreciate, I'll emulate what Matt has said, and Matthew will say the same thing, is really appreciate everybody taking time out of their days and coming down or attending virtually and providing some really great comments. It's been great. So Ann?
Yeah, I would echo what Matthew just said, and Matt, we really appreciate all of your comments, and you will have more opportunities to provide more thorough input. As I mentioned a little earlier, we're going to be sending out an email with a link to a survey that you could take that, select your top 5 policies if you want to pick different ones than what you told us. And if you miss anything or have some thoughts, you can always email me directly, and those that didn't attend the meeting, we will be making sure that they provide their comments and weigh in on strategies. But the comments are really good, and we are going to be going to the next step of evaluating a lot of what Alana really summarized really well, is what's achievable, what are the cost benefits from a variety of standpoints, and this will not be the only time you see the strategy. We'll be working on this, fleshing out some of those details, the devil's in the details on strategies that seem to be most supported, bringing those back to you, continuing to get your input. And Matt really responded well to Mr. Quinn's questions about what happens in the end with this. And this will become a plan with some suggested implementation strategies, and some of those strategies might get implemented more quickly because they might be easier to implement. Some of them, if it's something that we need to raise money for, but that'll be fleshed out in the plan. And we definitely, as much as we can make any of our tools and our current development code and anything that we look at maybe adopting through this plan easy to understand for everyone, we will try to do that visually. We're trying to do that with handouts, and so your comments are helping us through this process, but we're always taking notes and looking at ways to improve on anything that you might encounter when you're coming to our department. So we do appreciate that. And with that, I'll hand it back over to the consultants, and you'll be getting a follow-up email from me, but you don't have to wait to send me more comments, and we'll share any thoughts, everything back out with you, especially from those that weren't here today.
Yeah, and I don't have a ton to add to what Ann just said and what Matthew said. And just to reiterate that our next step will be to evaluate these strategies in more detail and address exactly some of the kinds of questions and kind of criteria that Alana mentioned a moment ago. I think part of the point of having the discussion with you about which of these strategies ought to be kind of highest priority is to help guide the amount of work we put into evaluation of different types of strategies. So I think this conversation was really helpful towards that end. It doesn't mean we're not going to look at things at all necessarily, unless we thought we heard, oh, nobody likes that. But it will help guide our efforts to some degree in that way. So we will be doing that over the next kind of couple of months. And then we'll have an updated set of information back to you. I think I am really mindful of the comments about, try to keep it simple. We'll try, but it'll also be kind of complicated in terms of some of the information we provide you, but we'll try to at least present it in as, I guess, understandable and clear way as we can to help continue to inform the conversation with all of you. So that's where we're headed next, along with some of the more immediate next steps that Ann mentioned a moment ago. So that's kind of it for me for next steps. And Ann has something to add, and then I'll thank you all and turn you.
I just forgot to mention that, this meeting is being recorded. You can invite your friends, your colleagues to watch the meeting if they found this interesting or whatever, but it is going to be posted to the website. It's being recorded live, and we can get comments from people that you work with who may know more about some of these issues or whatever. It's not restricted to you. We will continue to reach out to folks that we've heard from. We are developing an interested parties list that it will never be closed off. It's always open for people to get involved and stay involved. And the project website will continue to be updated with materials as they evolve. So I just wanted to remind you to be ambassadors out there for encouraging more participation and comments because we want this to be successful just like you do. So thank you again for your time today. And you will be getting a survey for our next meeting dates. We're looking at a July meeting and a September meeting. It seems like the lunch hour-ish for 2 hours is our good formula. We'll just need to find the day that works around people's summer schedules and getting into the fall. So be looking for that as well, so we can get that on your calendars before you get too busy. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.